In the vast lands of Hyrule, many legends have been passed down for generations, different tales from different times, but all about a brave hero and a mighty sovereign who protect their lands from evils and destruction. Feared usurper kings of other realms, corrupt mages, or beasts beyond imagination. Of course, the children of Hyrule are given tales of bravery, where the hero slays the beast, and the princess blessed with great wisdom makes fools of savage kings. Lessons from the past to be given as warnings and values. But there are tales for which all who draw breath in this land know, a story of creation. Before the gift of time, before woodland spirits, and the first kiss of life, 3 golden goddesses moulded this land from nothing. These golden goddesses gave meaning to the heroes and kings of old. Din, goddess of power, gave the earth we live upon. Furor, goddess of courage, breathed life into her earth. And Nehru, goddess of wisdom, gave all life purpose. And while their beloved creations had boundless potential to prosper on their own, it needed a guide and a protector, someone to love and cherish it. This guide is our Grace, the divine goddess Hylia. Stories of our beloved goddess of light say she is kind and gentle to all, using her endless wisdom to help us prosper. Her power kept us safe, and her courage helped us through hardship. We were able to thrive, even when she was pulled from this plane. Only leaving out of love for her people, she defends against a darkness which threatens the delicate balance of the golden goddesses created to this day. We forever are grateful to her for her sacrifice, but one day a year, when the snow falls and dampens the life that grows, we dedicate a day to her and her alone. Her child, the one blessed with holy blood, prepares a celebration of her grace to give thanks for her divine protection and our prosperity. While this day is prioritized every year, I've come before the great goddess Hylia herself, as the one who carries her blood, to apologize for the ignorance across the land, for this year is unlike the others. Instead of the tales of the goddess's sacrifice being spread and thanks being widely given, it is poisoned with worry. Worry sprouted from my failures and a child's worst nightmare. A nightmare of the impending calamity that threatens the lands the golden goddesses blessed us with. Lands a holy princess and the knight gifted with the sword that seals the darkness are currently the only hope for. Because of this worry, the beauty of this world and the prosperity we've been blessed with has been overshadowed. For this, I come before you in apology, hoping that my people may be forgiven, and hoping beyond reason that I may be forgiven for their strife, for I am the reason their fears cannot be put at ease. I would also like to make a promise that I, Princess Zelda Daphnis of Hyrule, and descendant of Hylia, will give thanks this day she deserves. Please forgive us, and may the day of our grace be upheld to the best of our ability this winter. The day memorializing the goddess's sacrifice. The day of Gracemas. In your honor.
As the princess's words echoed, light shone upon her from the tall windows on each side of the large, elegant building she was in, her long golden hair sparkling in the sun. It was a temple with incredible intricacy in the stone and tile. The building itself was one elongated room with a ceiling so high it was impossible to discern how it had been built so long ago, for hinted at by its name, the Temple of Time had been around longer than time itself. In the center of the room was a long red carpet with rows of benches on either side. The carpet lined the center of the floor to the end of the hall, where it traveled up a large staircase to the enormous statue at its top. It was a monumental sculpture of a woman with wings and long flowing hair, with her hands clasped together in front of her. The princess knelt at the base of the statue, mimicking the same pose, wearing a long white strapless gown, simple in design, her arms and shoulders bare. While the princess continued her prayer, there was another in the room, watching her from near the temple's entrance, listening to the dulcet tones of her voice as she quietly spoke. He was a modest-looking young man, short in stature, with a soft face and large azure eyes. His shaggy, dirty blonde hair was tied into a ponytail at the back of his head, though his bangs were on full display, slightly parted for him to be able to see. His clothes were as unadorned as he was, a bright blue tunic with white embroidery, tan trousers, and a few leather belts that held his belongings. Most of those belongings consisted of minor necessities, such as rupees or small snacks that he liked to munch on occasionally. However, there was one belt, a baldric, that held something special. It was the belt that rested on his shoulder and crossed over his torso that usually held a magnificent purple-winged blade and its gold and navy sheath. This time, though, neither the sword nor the scabbard was on his back, for now they were resting in front of him with his hands on the sword's pommel and the tip of the sheath on the red carpet before him. He continued to listen to the princess's quiet words, only able to hear thanks to the resonance of the empty hall. His pointed ears had heard the tale she mentioned, the tale of the impending calamity that threatened the land in which a princess and a knight with the sword that seals the darkness were tasked with defending. Glancing down at the splendid blade he held, his thoughts wandered slightly to what it meant to hold such a sword, until his focus was quickly snapped back into place by the sound of approaching boots from outside. Quickly turning, he peered out the Temple of Time's doorway to see a few of the temple's attendants coming toward the entrance, pulling wagons full of brilliant blue and fluffy white decorations behind them. Taking another glance at the kneeling princess on the other side of the temple's interior, he buckled his sword properly on his back and stepped through the doorway to greet their visitors. It took a few moments until one of the approaching attendants noticed his presence, then quickly informed the others, all of whom looked terrified to see the knight standing before them. Managing to rein in some of the shock, the head attendant, a woman dressed in a simple black dress, stepped forward.
Sir Link, champion destined to save our lands and...
Just Link is fine.
Though his tone was calm and collected, the attendant swallowed and bowed, mimicked immediately by the others behind her.
Please forgive our negligence. We knew you and the princess were due to arrive today, but we also had our duties of furnishing the temple with decorations for the upcoming holiday. For it is in only 12 days. We thought we'd see you coming as we prepared. We deeply apologize for missing Her Royal Highness's arrival. To think we'd miss...
Please, raise your head.
Nervously, the head attendant raised her head to be greeted with a small, friendly smile from the champion before her.
The princess is busy in prayer at the moment, so you'll need to decorate a little later, if that's alright.
Of course. By all means, we'd never interrupt a prayer to the goddess with one of her blood. When the goddess has heard her, please come down to the lower levels of the temple. We'll prepare something for you and...
That won't be necessary, and please, don't worry. Between you and I, the princess preferred not to be greeted, nor did she want to be disturbed when leaving. You all did nothing wrong. In fact, you could say you did her quite the favor by letting her focus. Wouldn't you agree?
That isn't how it's supposed to.
The attendant paused, catching the glint behind the champion's eyes. Hesitantly, she nodded, surprising those behind her.
Of course. I'm glad we made her visit as comfortable as possible for her. We'll return later this evening to decorate the Grand Temple. If you do need anything, please make us aware.
I will. Thank you.
With a bow from her and the still confused attendants behind her, the group began to head back, pulling their wagons behind them. Noticing the ones pulling the wagon slightly struggling, he called out to them again.
Excuse me.
Nervously pausing, the head attendant looked back at him.
Why don't you leave the wagons?
When the attendant looked hesitant to do so, he added,
The princess won't mind nor tell of how a wagon was left inside as she leaves the temple, I swear to you. Please, leave them up here.
Though the attendant still looked hesitant, she raised a hand, a sign for those pulling the wagons to release them. While they tried to hide it, he caught the glint of relief on their faces the moment they let go. With a smile and a nod, Link dismissed them. He watched as they disappeared across the courtyard and down the large staircase he knew led to lower levels of the temple. Taking a deep breath, he looked up at the clouds passing over them, slightly dark and grouping together, beginning to block out the sunlight that had been shining down upon them. As a new breeze blew, he felt the bite of frost against his skin, though he did not shiver. While it would take more than that to affect him, one thing was for certain.
Snow is coming soon.
He watched the clouds above pass by over the temple. Suddenly, the sweet voice he heard from the temple sounded in his pointed ears again.
Link, is everything all right?
Lowering his gaze, he glanced around the courtyard again before turning back to the temple's entrance. There, the golden-haired girl stood, still dressed in her beautiful white dress, shoulders and collarbone exposed, and her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Her radiant hair fell past her waist, her dress billowing around her sandal-clad feet, and her bright emerald eyes locked onto Link's blue ones. At the sight of her, Link smiled, giving her one slightly larger than the one he gave the attendants.
Everything's just fine, Zelda. Did you finish your prayer?
I did, thank you.
Though her words were simple, he could pick up on the slight sounds of disappointment in her tone. They were followed by a quick averting of her eyes, which allowed her to notice the wagons left alone before them.
Did the maidens come?
They did, but I sent them away.
Oh dear. I don't want them to get into trouble. It was selfish of me to want to sneak in undisturbed. It's their duty to greet me.
I took care of it.
Despite his assurance, Zelda gave him a guilty look.
Trust me, they'll be okay. And even if someone tries to trouble them, I'm sure a word from the princess herself, not wanting to be disturbed, will smooth things out. If that even happens, that is.
Right. Thank you, Link.
Suddenly, another gust of cold wind buffeted them. At this, the princess held herself even tighter, flinching at the wind's frostiness.
You'll catch something if you stand in the cold for long like that. Why don't you get dressed? Then we can head back to the castle. If we leave now, we'll make it before the moon fully rises.
With a nod in agreement, the princess disappeared back into the temple, where Link knew the one bag they had brought up with them was waiting. For a few minutes, he waited out in the chill wind until the princess returned, now wearing a much warmer outfit. It was a long white coat with gold designs and lined with white fur. There was a thicker, buttoned-up tunic underneath, with a fur cowl around her neck. Her lower body was clothed in dark, form-fitting pants and leather boots, also lined with fur. It was a beautiful set, accentuating the elegance of its wearer. While Link's attention was momentarily focused on her beauty, eventually he noticed the bag and another unknown furry cloth she was holding in her arms, balanced above her fur-lined wrist cuffs.
You didn't have to carry that. I would have gone to get it after you had changed.
I'm not helpless. I can carry a few things, you know that. We aren't at the castle, so allow me to be of some assistance. I'd like to make things as easy for you as you make them for me, just as you did earlier today.
I guess I can't argue with that. I appreciate it, but I'd like to take that now, just in case. We can't have the attendants see you carrying that down the stairs, even if I already sent them away. If you would.
He held out a hand, ready to take the bag from her, which made Zelda sigh in defeat. She raised the bag to him, but when he reached out to take it, she cleared her throat.
If you would put that hood on before taking the bag, that would be wonderful.
Link gave her a questioning look. Furrowing her brow, she explained.
You may be more resilient than most of us normal Hylians are, but I'd like to know you're actually comfortable, not just fine. So, if you would, please.
She gestured down to the fur-lined hood resting on top of the bag. He stared down at the hood before chuckling, causing Zelda to furrow her brow in consternation.
Why are you laughing? I'm trying to look out for your well-being.
I know, and I appreciate that, Princess. It's just amusing to see you so protective.
And what's that supposed to mean?
In response, Link simply took the hood off the bag and threw it around his shoulders. It was a lovely Hylian hood, dark green in color and lined with fur similar to Zelda's. Though she was still curious about his earlier teasing, Zelda decided best to move on from it. Instead, she chose to ask about the cloak.
How is it?
It's perfect. Thank you. Now, if you would.
He held out his hand again. Though she was still a bit reluctant, the princess placed the bag in his hand, now full of the prayer dress she'd changed out of. Holding the bag by its straps, he threw it over one shoulder. Gesturing toward the staircase on the other end of the court, the knight and his princess journeyed down the winding stairs, passing the lower levels and other buildings situated around the Temple of Time's front entrance. Lining the staircase and smaller buildings, banners had been hung up, now billowing in the cold breeze.
Oh, it looks like they've already started decorating down here. The banners, they've changed. Oh, I think I like the blue and white banners more than the usual red and gold ones. It feels more cheery, in a way.
I've always liked the holidays.
Oh, would your family do anything special? Or maybe your village?
We wouldn't do much. As for my family, it was just my sister and father. During the holiday season, he would receive most of his orders, repairing doors or helping hang decorations throughout the town.
He would help with the decorating?
Chuckling, Link gestured toward the stone houses the temple attendants inhabited.
Well, we didn't exactly have attendants to do that for us all the way out there. So he and a few others around town would pitch in and help. I helped by carrying tools and bolts for the banners wherever they were needed, along with my sister once she got big enough.
Oh, that's adorable, Link.
Still giggling, she could clearly imagine a little version of Link running around with a bag full of metal. While it didn't show on his face, being called adorable made him feel warmer than any cloak could.
Thanks. That was really all we did, besides give gifts to those that we cared about. The usual tradition.
I see. That sounds like a wonderful time.
Link smiled, though only for a moment, for he sneaked a glance over at the princess beside him, only to see a glint of longing beyond her irises. Furrowing his brow slightly, he looked around the temple grounds before clearing his throat.
Have Have you ever done anything special for Christmas?
At the sound of his question, Zelda gave him a look of surprise, one Link immediately noticed.
If that's okay to ask, Princess, I don't mean to be rude by questioning your personal life.
It's all right. It's okay. I promise. It is. It just caught me off guard for a moment, is all. It's rare for people to ask genuine questions as such. Not that I disapprove. It just doesn't happen often. Besides, if anyone can ask me questions like that, it's you, especially considering all we've spoken about before.
Right. My apologies, Zelda.
Placing a hand on his chest, he gave a slight bow of his head.
Then, if I may, have you done anything special for the holidays before?
Thoughtfully, Zelda clasped her hands behind her lower back.
It depends on what your definition of special is, I suppose. As you know, we never had to decorate. The chamberlains and maids always handled that task late in the evenings, the day before the holidays began, so that when my father or I awoke, we'd see all the beautiful decor.
So the castle's already decorated then. Today is the 12th day before Christmas.
Did you not enter the castle and see for yourself?
Link shook his head.
I went straight from the barracks to the stables to get our horses ready for the trip here. We did meet outside early this morning.
That's true. I guess you'll have to see the wonderful job they did this evening. The castle looks amazing, as it always does, with the hallways lined with blues and silvers. That's possibly the only real festive feeling I get this time of year.
Is that really it? Is there nothing else?
Beyond just decorations, my duties actually take quite the priority during this time. Now more than ever due to the signs of the impending calamity. Since I have her blood and supposedly her powers, the idea is that I may have a stronger connection to the goddess, since most of the land is praying to her in appreciation. After today, though, I believe that to be false.
Zelda slowly paused in her steps, turning to glance back at the temple now high above them. Link stopped and turned as well, noticing where her eyes were focused. Suddenly, the temple, which was nothing more than just a building to him, looked almost eerie. While he tried to convince himself it was due to every other building having been decorated with bright colors, with the temple being held off due to his command, deep inside, he knew very well why it did. It bothered him that Zelda's prayers had again gone unanswered. For a silent minute, the two continued their trek down the seemingly endless amount of stairs. Finally, Link cleared his throat.
What about gifts? I'm sure His Majesty must give you something each year.
Usually a new dress or a book. All things I appreciate, of course. I don't mean to sound ungrateful, for I know my father tries. It's just...
It's hard right now.
Zelda nodded.
It is. Every year on Gracemas itself, we have a feast in the castle. It used to be such a fun occasion for us, but with each year that passes, the more tense it grows. If I were to be completely honest, this year I don't even want to go. I don't wish to have all those eyes on me filled with disappointment that I was yet again unheard by the goddess.
What about the festival? The festival held in Castletown every year on Gracemas.
You know, I find it shocking that you know about the festival the townspeople hold.
I do more than just train in the barracks and eat.
Oh, that's why you know of it. You must go for the food they prepare every year.
So, do you go to the festival?
Every now and then, though I don't usually get to participate. It's always us riding around in a carriage to wave at the people and maybe give a few words, but just as everything else, that too has grown a little too tense for me. I usually watch the lights and listen to the music from my room each year.
That doesn't sound as fun.
It'd be nice to just live amongst the crowd and enjoy the festivities, but I have different duties. To pray in the castle and learn how these powers are supposed to manifest. Maybe after the calamity, I'll be able to go.
Zelda's words had only grown less confident the more she spoke, now looking down at her fur-gloved hand. Feeling as though he had accomplished the opposite of his goal, Link frowned.
Hey, there weren't any decorations up in Castletown when we left this morning. Maybe they'll be up by the time we return this evening. The tree they put over the fountain each year might be up, and we'll catch a glimpse of it. If you want to get a look, that is.
At the sound of this, Zelda's eyes lit up slightly as she looked over at him.
That'd be wonderful, Link.
The snow had long started falling by the time the princess and her champion arrived at Castletown, covering not only the fields but also the buildings of the town in its bright powder. As they arrived at the town's gates, they slowed their horses to a trot before stopping, where the guardsmen quickly signaled for the barrier to be opened upon realizing who was arriving in the evening's overcast darkness. With their horses trotting beneath them, one with a fur coat the same shade as Zelda's, and a dark-coated one for Link, they rode side by side down the busy roads of the town. Castletown was a bustling place, even at such a late hour. The roads were packed with people, families and individuals alike, squeezing by each other as they crossed the fancy stone brick roads that connected the town. The buildings were all well maintained and clean, with beautiful exterior wooden frames, tan mortar in between, and roofs of gorgeous blue tiles. While most were the usual 2 stories, some were even more, while the tallest buildings were the watchtowers in the large church. Though it was crowded, plants, stalls, and other goods were still visible, along with the banners that lined the road. Before, the banners had all been gold and a brilliant red, as well as the flags that hung between each banner's pole. Now, though, most of the decor had been replaced with blue and silver, which shone brilliantly in the lantern lights on the building's walls and lampposts. At first, none of the busy townsfolk paid the 2 of them much mind, for the darkness of the clouds above, the snowfall, and the lateness of the evening had made it difficult to see clearly. Eventually, however, the distinctive white of Zelda's coat and the glow from her golden hair, along with the bright blue of Link's tunic, alerted villagers to who was passing by. It was still unusual for the townsfolk to see the princess with only one knight and not a plethora of them. Regardless, no one questioned why one young short Hylian was the only guard the princess had. It was well known that even without that legendary blade on his back, more knights would only be a hindrance. Everyone knew of the champion's skill with a blade. With royalty passing by, the townspeople cleared the way, simply bowing as the 2 traversed the town on horseback before returning to their duties of decorating the town. Zelda smiled as they passed the people, glancing around at all the decorations they could see through the snowfall.
It looks wonderful, doesn't it?
It does.
Though Link had answered, his eyes were less on the decor and more on the people among them. Every now and then, he could see a glint of distaste or dissatisfaction in a villager's eyes. Those whose eyes did have that disdain quickly replaced it with fear upon meeting the champion's gaze, then promptly turned and fled deeper into the crowd or vanished between alleyways. Unfortunately, there were only so many places the knight could look, and it wasn't long before Zelda's voice called out to him again.
I think we'd best make our way to the castle quickly. It'd be better not to dawdle.
He had hoped he wouldn't hear such guilt in her voice, yet even he knew it was bound to happen. She had noticed. With a nod, he gripped the reins to his horse a little tighter. With a tap of his heel against the beast, he urged his horse to move a little faster, just enough to get ahead of Zelda and clear the way while still giving townsfolk enough time to move.
So much for enjoying the scenery. She's doing her best for you all.
With Link guiding them quickly through the crowds, they made their way down the main roads until the square came into view. Unlike the tight streets of the main roads, the town square was large and open. It was built to be a large circle, bordered by the town's buildings, with multiple adjoining roads that connected every section of the settlement. It was here that the most banners and flags were visible at one time, for they lined the stone paths and short staircases. In the center of the square was a magnificent fountain, usually spraying a continuous cascade of sparkling clear water, but now the fountain was only filled with accumulating snow. Still, this was a difficult task for the snowflakes drifting from the darkened clouds above, for the fountain had been covered by an extremely large tree, rivaling the watchtowers in height. While tall, it was certainly bare compared to the rest of the town's decorations. A few round, intricately painted ornaments had been placed at the bottom branches, with smaller banners and even little stone carvings of the same deity Zelda had been praying to in the Temple of Time earlier that day. At the moment, many ladders had been placed around the tree for a few brave townsmen to climb, continuing the slow effort of decorating the entire tree.
It looks as though they've just started.
It probably took all day alone just to get it up. I couldn't imagine trying to get it through the streets, much less transporting it from the Tabantha region. I had hoped it'd be fully decorated by now, but... I'm sorry you couldn't see the finished tree.
It's quite all right. Maybe next time.
Tearing his gaze away from the roads for a moment, he glanced back at Zelda to see her disappointed eyes, still staring at the tree as they rode past. Whether it was disappointment at the tree not being finished, or the fact she was doing her best not to meet the villagers' gazes, he didn't know, though something told him the latter was most likely true. Concluding that this was doing more harm than good, Link urged them forward, passing through the square and between the buildings again until they arrived at a large inclined bridge. At its top was another far more fortified gate, one that protected a shadowed, towering castle. This time, they didn't need to stop at the gate, for they were the only ones expected to arrive at this hour. The gate's thick iron doors began to creak open, its bottom corner scraping against the stone beneath it with a rumble, causing the entire bridge to shake. With the gate opened and a quick wave from the guards on each side, the knight and his princess rode onto the castle grounds, where they came to a stop only when they reached one of the gatehouses near the castle stables. Leaving their horses with the stable hands, with Zelda having a noticeably difficult time getting off her steed without squirming, Link accompanied her into and through the castle, where the elegantly crafted stone brick halls had been relieved of their red and gold banners in favor of the silver and blue decor. They traveled through the castle until eventually arriving at a large room similar in structure to the Temple of Time. It was a vast, elongated room, lacking windows and benches in order to be filled with countless books, with an open tile floor covered in tables and chairs for study. There was even a mezzanine level, supported by pillars, that allowed one to reach the higher section of the bookshelves. The ceiling was still visible to those sitting on the first floor, where a few researchers currently happened to be. There were a few silver-haired individuals, most of whom wore thick tan clothing and were of average height, but one stood out against the rest. He was double the size of the other people in the library, with strong-looking arms, a large midsection, and disproportionately short legs. While the other's clothes were simple, he wore a long dark robe with brilliant gold accents, and unlike the lifelong white hair unique to those around him, his long hair and beard were silvered with age and embellished by a gold crown on his head. Still, despite his older appearance, he looked well sitting at one of the tables, occasionally requesting additional books to be brought to him as he read through the ones already stacked high beside him. As the princess walked into the library, with her knight following behind her, she paused upon the sight of her father across the hall. After a brief moment to collect herself, she strode as confidently as she could across the hall, still followed by Link, before stopping at her father's table. Upon her arrival, Rome glanced up from his book, meeting his daughter's emerald eyes. Taking note of her, he finished reading the page he was on before closing the book and setting it down on the table.
My daughter, welcome back.
Even while speaking quietly, his voice still resonated with strength and confidence. He needn't raise his voice to send shivers down someone's spine. Arriving at the table, Zelda stood before him, while Link kneeled in respect.
Tell me, how was the trip to the Temple of Time?
The trip itself was fine, Father.
To say the trip itself was fine is to imply that your prayer was not. Are there still no changes? No answer from the goddess?
No, Father. None at all. I recited the prayer word for word, and still...
You must not simply recite the words, Zelda.
While still calm and collected, the rumbling of his voice vibrated even Link's body.
You must understand the words, to feel the weight they carry, to feel that weight in your blood. You're not simply asking the goddess for help, you are a part of her. You have to link yourself with her, as if becoming one with her.
I'm not sure how to do that, Father. I've been working hard trying to get her to listen. I'm not the goddess.
Link wanted nothing more than to stand, to stop the outburst he knew was coming from deep within her. Yet Rome's voice quickly did it for her in a much more authoritative way before she could finish her next few words.
I'm Zelda.
I am not telling you to become the goddess, Zelda. I am telling you to find the connection needed to use her powers as if you were. Whether you like it or not, the goddess's powers are your powers. By blood, the connection is there.
But, Father...
Zelda!
It echoed throughout the library, loud enough that even the others in the room, who had been studiously ignoring the conversation and remaining as inconspicuous as possible, turned to watch. Zelda prepared herself, lowering her head in anticipation of more scolding, yet after a moment of weighing his words, all Rome did was sigh. He stared at his daughter for a moment before looking down at the book in his hands.
You need to take your training as seriously as you do your studies. Look here.
Responding to his demand, Zelda looked up to see him raising the book he had closed.
Sheikah technology. The weapons of great importance, created by the Sheikah from an era long past. Weapons that will help us defend ourselves against the calamity. We could read these words over and over, recite them from memory. But what good would that do? No. We read these texts to try and understand what it is that we are dealing with. We do not simply read and recite these when tinkering with the machines. I, the Sheikah in this room, and even you, have read these old books repeatedly in order to understand. And the simple fact that you have been trying to understand these old texts tells me that you know what I am trying to tell you.
Reading texts regarding these artifacts? Text giving us the clues we need to understand is different from being given nothing to learn.
Rome shook his head.
I am not saying the duty you have is easy. What I am saying is that your focus is elsewhere. The same energy you use to educate yourself on this technology, even when we have little to no direction, should be put into your training as well. If you do, then perhaps the connection to your powers will be discovered. Do you understand?
I understand.
Very well. If you have more to say on the matter, we can continue this conversation tomorrow. For now, go rest. It is late, and I still have a few studies of my own to attend to. You are dismissed.
Yes. Good night, Father.
Receiving a nod from her father in return, she turned on her heel to leave and head to her quarters. At this, Link stood and nodded, ready to accompany her, yet Rome cleared his voice, a demand in attention.
Sir Link, a moment, please.
At this, Zelda paused and turned, to which Rome raised an eyebrow.
Is there something else you wish to discuss at this hour?
Not at all.
Then, if you would.
Rome gestured toward the other end of the library where the exit was, yet Zelda stood in place.
Was there something after all?
I just expected to be escorted, is all.
Rome seemed somewhat surprised at this, possibly considering her earlier thoughts and feelings toward her knight's constant presence a few months back. Yet, instead of questioning her reasoning further, he simply called out a name.
Lady Impa, if you would, please.
To Zelda's surprise, a sudden dull crash came from behind one of the library's pillars. Both she and Link looked over to see a young, white-haired Sheikah woman who had dropped the books she had been holding at the call of her name, clearly shocked to have learned she had been so easily discovered eavesdropping. Judging by the relaxed tone in the king's voice, she had been caught the moment his conversation with his daughter began. She was an average-sized woman, with round, smooth cheeks, hair that fell past her knees, and the similar tan and navy clothing the rest of the Sheikah in the library were wearing. One particular distinction from the rest of her people was the large hat resting on her back, held up by a string tied around her neck, and a blue insignia of an eye and teardrop on her forehead. While Link and Zelda usually had known her to be on top of things, graceful and stern when it came to castle duties, schedules, and other sorts of responsibilities, it was quite a sight to see someone so well organized in such a flustered state. After awkwardly scurrying to pick up the books she had dropped, she hurried over to the table where the king was sitting. Giving her a knowing look, he held out a large hand, taking the small stack of books from her before gesturing to Zelda. Understanding her task, the Sheikah quickly bowed before hurrying to Zelda's side. Though it appeared Zelda still wanted to disagree, she reluctantly turned away and disappeared out of sight with the Sheikah attendant at her side. Rome raised an eyebrow, still curious about why Zelda had been so adamant about having Link escort her, yet he turned his attention to the knight in question, who had lowered himself down to one knee once more. Noticing this as he reopened his book, Rome began.
No need to kneel. Stand.
As Link stood, he flipped through the book's pages before finding the line he had left off on.
Tell me, how do you believe she is faring?
Your Majesty?
My daughter. She is as self-conscious as she is stubborn. I fear that the more she does not recognize any progress, the less she may be able to see the progress she has made. You have kept a vigilant eye on her this past year, something I am grateful for, simply beyond being her appointed knight. You have watched over her, to the point one may presume you actually care for her.
Unsure of what to say, Link looked down at his boots.
If you believe I am scolding you, you are wrong. As I said before, I am grateful for your efforts. What I want to know is if you have noticed something while caring for her that maybe she herself may have missed. What say you?
As he answered, each word crushed his spirit.
She works hard. I can assure you she does. We don't know what she is missing, but she is doing her best.
I know she is. I know she is bitter towards me, and as her father, I want nothing more than to be able to guide her, but just as she is, I am blind to the workings of the goddess. There was only one person who could have taught her, and...
His eyes glossed over for a moment before exhaling in fatigue. Flipping to the next page of his book, he continued.
Right now, the only person who can find the answer to unlocking these powers is her. If there is anyone who can find the answer, it is her. Do you know why I appointed you as her personal knight?
To protect her.
That is correct, but there was one other reason. I would have declared this sooner, but I needed to be sure I could count on you to protect her. To be able to protect her, even while alone.
Your Majesty?
The sword you carry on your back, the sword that seals the darkness, the Master Sword. It is a legendary blade, used to weaken the Calamity Ganon and other monsters before. A blade crafted by the goddess herself. If there is anyone who would be able to help my daughter in this endeavor, it would be you, Link. Whether it would be you yourself or the sword that whispers in your ear. Tell me, has the sword ever spoken to you?
No, Your Majesty. Not once.
I see. It is said that there is a voice inside the sword, a spirit of sorts. Whether that is true or not, only you or my daughter may be able to figure it out. The reason you are assigned to her, and given time alone with her, is the belief that something within you or that sword will spark her powers to arrive, if nothing else will.
Link didn't reply. It wasn't a sign of disrespect. In fact, he wished the king's words were true. The sword on his back, the blade directly connected to the goddess, the weapon that felt as though it was a part of himself. It felt as though he should be able to help the princess. In fact, when it was put that way, he felt it was almost strange that he wasn't able to help more. Though his face remained stoic, Rome stared into his eyes before continuing.
Do not misunderstand. This is not a failure on your part, nor is it a failure on Zelda's, which is what I would tell her if given just a moment to shed my responsibility to this kingdom.
With a defeated sigh, he flipped to the next page of his book. The last sentence he spoke caused Link's ears to perk up. As nerve-wracking as it was, using the knowledge that he was part of whatever plans Rome had to unlock Princess Zelda's power, he chose to speak up.
Sire, may I ask you something regarding the princess's training?
Surprised, as Link had never shown a propensity for questions, the king tore his attention away from the book's pages and glanced at the young knight. His eyes weren't filled with anger, only curiosity. He gave a small gesture, permitting Link to continue. Taking a second to ensure he was ready to risk his status, Link moved forward with his question.
Forgive me for what I am about to ask, but if I am considered worthy, and even somewhat expected to help the princess in her endeavors to unlock her powers, then I can't help but ask, why is it you push her so hard in her training, knowing the progress she's made is slim to none?
As impertinent of a question as it was, Link stood tall, ready to accept the consequences, yet Rome's calm demeanor remained. In fact, he closed his book and leaned back in his chair, bringing his hands together to rest on his large stomach. He sat for a moment, as if considering the answer to the question, before finally heaving a deep sigh.
The reason I push my daughter as hard as I do is simply a case of not knowing what else there is to do. My daughter is the key to success. There is no dispute, as much as I would like to.
Hesitantly, Link pushed the boundaries of his inquiries even further.
Is there really no other way to help her? To force her to pray in front of the goddess statues, to face her shortcomings time and time again?
There is no other way.
Leaning forward, he raised his hands and grabbed the stack of books Impa had given to him, placing them down on the edge of the table for Link to inspect. The king gestured toward the books as a signal of permission, and Link stepped forward to take one into his hands. As Rome began to explain, he flipped through the book's pages.
All historical accounts we have been able to compile are in this library. Any record of the goddess beyond hearsay or theories is practically non-existent. She lived in an era far beyond even that of 10,000 years ago. All we know for certain is that those with the blood of the goddess would pray to the ancient springs of power, wisdom, and courage. Zelda is not yet of age to travel to the Spring of Wisdom, so we must make do with what we have. The Spring of Courage, the Spring of Power, and any other holy goddess statues scattered across our kingdom.
As Rome spoke, Link read a line or so of the pages he scanned. All of them were, as Rome said, details of the springs and the art of praying.
Beyond these texts here, there have been a few others, some telling of floating islands, others of different realms, and even tales of time, all of which mirror the children's stories. Something I found interesting, but not useful. Out of all these texts, though, one of them did stand out to me.
Leaning over to another stack, he took another book into his hand and opened it.
It told of the first king of Hyrule, its founder, a man by the name of Rauru. It is said that he married a priestess with the blood of the goddess. Supposedly, this is where Zelda's lineage begins, and yet again, all it tells is how her power came from the art of praying. To be in tune with the blood that courses through their veins.
With a deep sigh, he closed the book and placed it back on the table.
I wish there was another way, and I have been searching for it alongside the technological advancements we have made. But there is nothing else.
I still believe she's being pushed too hard.
Link had spoken this while his focus was still on the pages in his hands. It only took half a second for him to realize who he had just spoken to. Quickly snapping the book closed, his hands dropped to his sides as he bowed in apology.
Forgive me, Your Majesty. I was lost in the pages, and I...
You are a lot like your father. Easily lost in the welfare of others, and sometimes cannot hold his tongue because of it. I understand your position, Link. It is a stance I know many others in the castle share. But unfortunately, they are not dealing with the safety of this kingdom, nor the safety of their daughter, who is the one destined to defend it as well.
He held out a hand, into which Link placed the book he was holding.
I push my daughter because I want her to survive. If it were up to me, I would not have her go anywhere near this calamity Ganon. But destiny demands it, and I wish to prepare her as best I can to face a beast she cannot avoid. I wish not to put my daughter through so much, to put the weight of the world on her shoulders. But fate has demanded it be this way. I wish to change it, and in a way, I still hope it does.
With a stern look in his eyes, he met Link's azure gaze.
You are strong, Link. You have a sword like no other. The only relic of the goddess we have that she left us, and you wield it with power unmatched even by the technology of the ancient monks. I left my daughter in your care the moment I confirmed she would be completely safe with you. I pray that when the calamity arises, you will be the one to guide everyone, including her, to victory. That you will be the key to help her become the lock that seals the calamity away.
Leaning over, he placed a large hand on Link's shoulder.
I can see in your eyes that you still disagree with my methods. And I assure you, I understand. If in the next few months there are no signs of her powers awakening, I may consider other means if I can find them. I'm counting on you to keep my daughter safe, Link.
I understand.
Rome gave him a kind smile.
I am sure Arn is very proud of the man you have become, You remind me of him when he was in the Royal Guard. Zelda will remain here in the castle for the next few days. Gracemas is a time when the influence of the goddess is considered strongest. She will remain here in the castle, continuing her training. Do spend your time wisely, even while off duty. You are dismissed.
The king turned away, returning to the books on the table before him. Though Link wanted to push a bit harder to see if there was any other way Zelda could go about her training, he simply bowed and headed out of the library and into the castle halls. What was there to argue if he hadn't the faintest idea of what else she could do? It didn't help that Zelda was bound to her training for the holidays. He wanted to do something, to bring a smile to her face even though the cold prayers she was destined for in the coming holidays. He came to a stop in the middle of the hall. An idea had come to mind, possibly thanks to his success in challenging the king's authority, if one could call mere questioning a challenge, especially when permitted to do so. It was a foolish idea, but it wasn't one that seemed too unbelievable to get away with. It all depended on her. Itching to see her, a feeling he found strange beyond his current desire, he gave in. He started down the hallway again, turning into another hall and up a staircase, following the steps he knew the princess and her Sheikah attendant had taken only a few minutes before him.
Thank you for escorting me, Impo.
The two walked down one of the upper-level hallways of the castle toward her personal quarters, nearing the two large double wooden doors at the end. Two guards, both dressed in identical heavy metal armor and with spears in their hands, stepped aside to reveal the door handles just as they arrived.
I'm sorry you had to walk all this way.
Not at all, Princess. Though I do have a question, if you would.
The Sheikah attendant shifted past the princess, taking one of the door handles to open it for her, gesturing for her to enter. Though Zelda looked curious about Impa's inquiry, she stepped inside and beckoned the Sheikah to follow, who promptly closed the doors after them. They stood in a bedroom so large most ordinary folk would have considered it a house by itself. The stone brick walls were lined with bookshelves and cupboards. In the corner, there was a large desk filled with papers and even more books. Against one wall was the large draped bed with a much smaller desk for morning preparation, and another wall had a massive fireplace that was currently lit to keep her warm during winter evenings such as these. The room even had a large spiral staircase built into the final wall that led across a bridge to another tower of the castle, which served as a study. It was the perfect all-inclusive room, one fit for a princess. Inside, the two moved toward the center of the room, where the princess took a seat in an oversized armchair in front of a round table.
What is it you wished to ask me, Impo?
Well, and forgive me if this is quite a personal question, but I was curious as to why you happened to be so eager to wait for your appointed night earlier.
Zelda blinked.
Is there something strange about that? I simply figured Link would escort me back to my door, as he usually does. What's there to question?
The fact that you were okay with that.
Zelda's brow furrowed.
Come now, Impo. Stop tiptoeing around your words. You know you don't have to do so around me. At least, you know that's what I'd prefer.
Then, if I'm allowed to be frank, it looked as though you would have preferred if Link took you back to your room, versus the alternative of walking back yourself.
And to that, I again ask if there's something strange about that?
For you, yes. It's a complete turnaround from how you used to feel, preferring to run off through all of Hyrule by yourself to research in peace, away from everyone and most certainly away from him. Now you're telling me you'd not only appreciate, but would prefer to have him accompany you, not just around Hyrule, but through the castle, your own home, and even to your room.
Well, when you put it that way, I guess it does sound a little odd, but I wouldn't say there's any deeper meaning behind it. He understands me a little better than most do. Plus, we spend so much time together, and being so frustrated all the time was tiring. Us getting along was bound to happen. Besides...
Princess.
Impa made the bold choice of cutting the princess off, who, in turn, only blushed when she met the attendant's eyes.
Just be careful. Your father may not mind such closeness now, dare I say he might even be pleased by it. But just make sure you think about what comes after the calamity. I say this not only as the advisor, but as your friend.
Zelda stared into Impa's stern but caring amber eyes. After a few moments, the princess nodded.
I understand. Thank you, Impa.
Of course. And, hey, I don't say that to discourage you entirely. If you find a way, I may even support you. Though, the bard might be a little upset about it.
The bard? What does the bard have to do with any of this? Impa?
Unfortunately for her, the Sheikah had already hurried toward and disappeared out of the door with a teasing smile on her face. The princess frowned. As stern and logical as Impa could be, she sure had quite the mischievous side. She and her sister were alike in that regard. With the conversation having ended, the Sheikah disappeared from the room. Zelda stood from the soft armchair. As her advisor's words floated around her mind, she moved over to the bed, still fully clothed, and sat on the edge. After taking off her boots to reveal her bare feet, she lay back on the bedspread, where she stared up at the silky drapes that surrounded the perimeter and formed a canopy over the top of her bed frame. She listened to the crackling of the fireplace as she thought of everything that had transpired that day, before eventually finding herself again thinking about Impa's words. Of course she wouldn't be able to put those thoughts aside. It was a question she had started to ask herself recently. How was she supposed to deal with these ever-growing feelings after the calamity passed? Was she supposed to just live in the moment and deal with the issue after the fact? Or was she supposed to ignore what she could feel coming? Were these even the feelings she thought they were? They had only just recently sprouted, and it wasn't as though she had ever felt this way before to know. Annoyed with herself, she sighed and turned to lay on her side, looking out into the evening sky as snowflakes continued to fall and accumulate against the window panes. It was amazing that out of everything surrounding her, from the people's undisguised disdains to her father's disappointment in her, to their impending doom if she couldn't find a solution to her delinquent powers, somehow her emotions regarding her appointed knight were at the forefront of her mind. It was foolish, yet it was the only thing that gave her clarity in times like these. If only he were here to take her mind off of everything entirely. That, she knew, was an even more foolish thought. To believe that Link, the most respected knight in all of Hyrule, the hero that would face down the calamity as he was the one chosen by the Master Sword, would find his way into the princess's room so late at night? It was blasphemous enough that he referred to her by her first name even when alone, and that was something she practically had to order him to do just to feel closer to him. Besides, he'd be putting himself in danger to enter her room so late at night. It would not only be irresponsible and inappropriate, but inconsiderate of her to bring him here simply to enjoy his company. Suddenly there was a knock at the door.
Your Royal Highness, you have a guest.
Confused, Zelda pushed herself up and looked toward the door. If Impa had returned for some unknown purpose, she would have announced her arrival herself, as would any other with authority to visit her private quarters so late. Pushing herself off the bed and back onto her feet, she made her way to the door, and with a gentle pull on the handle, the hallway was revealed, along with her blue-clad appointed knight. Her eyes widened in shock, But before she could question, her knight immediately spoke.
Good evening, Your Royal Highness.
Link brought a hand to one side of his chest as he slightly bowed.
I've come to deliver a message from His Majesty for your ears only.
For me? But why would he simply not tell me when I was...
The princess paused, noticing Link's eyes quickly dart to the side, eyeing the guards who stood on either side of them. Picking up on his silent hint, she cleared her throat.
Of course, you may enter.
Stepping back, she allowed her knight into the room, who closed the doors behind him. The moment they stepped away from the door, Zelda turned to him, noticing his sigh of relief.
Link, do you actually have a message from my father?
I apologize, Princess, but I don't.
Link, do you not understand what hour it is to arrive at my quarters at such a time?
Though her words were a bit harsh, in actuality, she couldn't believe he stood before her. Of course, the one time she felt as though the goddess had finally heard a prayer of hers, it was one of her most scandalous. Forcing her childish glee down, trying to remain somewhat proper before him, she glared before noticing the slight bit of nervousness in his irises.
I apologize, Princess. I didn't think you would disapprove as much as you do, considering... It was simply poor and foolish judgment that I should have...
No, it wasn't... I'd be lying if I were to say it wasn't nice to see you. In fact, I'm actually glad you're here.
Zelda?
Zelda had stepped forward. Reaching out, she took one of his hands into both of her own and held it, looking down at their connection.
I'm really glad you're here.
This surprised Link, even if he didn't allow it to show. Noticing that she may have been enjoying the warmth of his hands a little too long, though she didn't release him, she looked back up at his eyes.
Tell me, why is it you went to such lengths to see me at this time? If the guards find out you came here without an actual reason...
Well, I feel as though I could make up some excuse if I were caught.
His mind drifted back to their earlier conversation with Rome. Ignoring whatever internal arguments told him that a scheme like this certainly wasn't what the king had meant, he continued.
I just wanted to make sure you were okay after, your talk with His Majesty.
You were worried about me?
I have to be. It's my job. Well, maybe doing foolish things such as this doesn't count as the job, I guess. It's just that I was worried about you.
Zelda stared into her knight's eyes, his hand still resting between hers, before speaking again.
If I don't unlock my paths, Hyrule could suffer a fate greater than we could ever imagine. As frustrating as it is, my father is pushing me so hard to save everyone. I understand that, and from a logical standpoint, it makes sense. I need to unlock these paths, and yet you still worry about me, my well-being.
Yeah? Is that strange of me?
Yes, it is.
She released his hand, and before Link realized what was happening, her arms were now around his torso, something that made his cheeks burn. It was a gentle hold, yet a hold nonetheless, something he would have never imagined would ever happen.
Zelda?
She didn't respond, tightening her hug ever so slightly, her cheek resting on the soft golden blonde locks hanging down at the side of his cheek. This was foolish, dangerous even, and she knew that. It was painfully clear to her, and yet This was all she wanted.
Zelda?
This time his voice was a lot gentler now that he had recovered from his initial shock. He didn't need to do anything, and she knew that. If he responded, they'd be putting themselves, and mainly himself, in jeopardy. No. All he had to do was stand there and allow her to enjoy his warmth for just a second longer. That was all she had expected, until she felt his warmth surround her own body in return. The touch was light, even lighter than the hug she was giving him, but it was a touch nonetheless.
They say the holiday, Gracemas, is the time of year when you should be thankful for those you have around you. Thankful not just for the goddess, but thankful for those the goddess has surrounded us with. Right now, at this very moment, you're the only one I feel that surrounds me, and me alone.
As they stood in the center of the large royal bedroom, still lightly holding each other, Link's mind traveled back to earlier that day, repeating the words they had spoken to each other in front of the Temple of Time. Suddenly, Zelda pulled back, which snapped Link back to the present. She stepped away, still not looking him directly in the eye. Believing their interaction had come to a close, he tried to compose himself, preparing to return to his knightly status, understanding there was no way such impropriety could continue. Yet Zelda reached out once again. Using just one of her fingers, she reached down and coiled it around one of his. Thus, joined together, she slowly took a step back, guiding him. Slowly, they walked to the bed, where the princess lowered herself to sit on the edge of the mattress. Link, with his fingers still curled around hers, stood at the bedside, yet he soon felt a gentle tug at his finger. He didn't need to think very hard to understand what it was she wanted. Keeping their fingers locked, he gingerly took a seat next to the princess, far closer to her than what they both knew would ever be permitted. Soon, Zelda gave up on suppressing her inner desires.
Will you stay with me for a while? Please, even if it's just for tonight. I'd like to have this.
Link gave a small smile.
Of course. I'm sure we can come up with some excuse to give to the guards.
Thank you.
Tilting slightly, she leaned her shoulder against his. The two sat in silence, the orange glow of the fireplace across the room bathing them in its mellow light. They watched the flickering flames, the burning wood beneath fueling their hypnotic dance.
I'm glad you're here.
If you like me being here, I can always come back.
Link said this, still feeling as though he were treading thin ice. Thankfully, a small smile appeared on Zelda's face, though her eyes were still locked onto and reflecting the flames of her fireplace.
As much as I'd appreciate that, I could never put that on you. This right here, I'm sure, is already such a brazen act. I can't put you in any more danger.
Then don't.
Link strengthened the grip of his finger around hers.
I'll do it myself. I'll find any excuse under the sun or the moon to come see you.
Link, I can't ask that of you.
You're not asking, and neither am I.
Surprised at not only being cut off, but effectively being overruled, Zelda turned away from the light of the fireplace and into the azure glow of her knight's irises. Immediately, Link felt the overwhelming urge to apologize, fearing he again might have overstepped his bounds, yet this time, he tamped the apology down. He stared directly back into her emerald eyes, refusing to back down, a direct rejection of Zelda's, the princess's, words. Instead of being chastised, Zelda simply gave a small smile in defeat as she leaned against his shoulder even more.
I'm curious as to what excuses you plan to give the gods.
I can get creative.
The two sat in silence again, listening to the crackling fire for some time.
What do you want for Gracemas?
What do I want? You mean as a gift? Are you... Link, I don't need anything. I get enough useful items as it is.
But they all feel sort of bland these days, don't they?
I told you that. That was me being a bit ungrateful. I don't need anything. You here is a gift enough as it is.
How late do you usually stay up praying around that time?
On Gracemas Day? Late, but not unreasonably so. Why?
Will you join me that night? If you aren't too tired.
Huh?
Zelda's cheeks started warming up.
Is that a no?
What? No. I mean, not no. I meant, yes, of course, I will, but why?
That is a surprise. A foolish surprise, but a surprise all the same.
Link, I told you I don't need...
I didn't ask if you were free so I could get you something. I asked if you'd spend time with me.
Finding loopholes now, are we? Fine, then. I'll go along with your scheme.
A scheme? Yeah, that's a good term for it.
What's that supposed to mean?
Link smiled awkwardly.
You'll find out on Gracemas.
"11 days passed in the blink of an eye. Unsurprisingly, the princess hadn't been able to see her knight very often throughout this time, for as she expected, she had been busy studying her prayers and repeating them in front of whichever goddess statue existed in the castle. Regardless of the cold wind and frozen snow, she wore her prayer dress, trying her best to do as her father said, to not simply recite, but try to understand. Yet, nothing made sense. The goddess would not answer her, and whatever secret there was to reaching them, if there was any at all, simply would not come to her. So when the day of Gracemas finally arrived, it went exactly as she foretold. As always, it started precisely at sunrise in her room, where she prepared for a long stretch of prayer. That alone took up most of the day, though nothing very exciting happened afterwards either. All that remained after that was the expected dinner with her father. The conversations were bland, all surrounding her non-existent progress with her supposed powers, all ending in the same disbelieving tone of possibly succeeding next time, all conversations she had already experienced before. A simple, tedious day that wasn't at all special for her despite it being a holiday. With dinner having now long passed and all wishes for happy holidays given to those around her, the princess finally retreated to her room. Though the moon had risen by now, it was only the moment her chamber doors closed behind her that she finally felt awake. While she was most certainly nervous, for she and her knight had already crossed so many lines, she couldn't help but feel a bit excited. The instructions he gave her the night he came to her bedroom were quite clear. After her royal duties for the holiday, simply head back to her room and wait. And that's what she did. She couldn't tell if she had actually waited for hours, or if her anticipation of finding out what Link had planned was making time move slowly. Regardless, she found herself fidgeting in impatience, rubbing the ends of her nightgown she had changed into, flipping through the books on her shelf even though she was unable to pay attention to the words, and even tidying up the sheets on her bed for the umpteenth time. Eventually, she found herself sitting in the soft armchair, watching the sliver of moon not hidden behind thick snow clouds rising higher with each passing moment. Soon, her eyelids started to droop as her will to stay awake started to fade. The moment they closed, a violent bang echoed throughout her large room as the doors were flung open, causing her eyes to snap back open. Practically jumping in her chair, she turned around to find her knight, the one she had barely seen these past 2 weeks, bursting into her room before quickly closing the doors behind him. With the bang of the door still reverberating in her ears, disorienting her as she tried to properly wake herself from her brief slumber, she rubbed her eyes to ensure she wasn't dreaming.
Link, what's going on?
Before she could finish, the knight simply rushed over to her side.
Winter gear on now. Make sure it has a hood. Hurry.
My winter gear?
After a second's pause, her eyes widened.
Change? Now? With you here?
You can just grab the coat and throw it over your nightgown, but do it now.
He glanced back at the doors, his ears twitching as if trying to hear something, before noticing Zelda hadn't moved.
Come on.
Reaching down, he took Zelda by the hand and practically yanked her to her feet. This alone was enough to make Zelda's heart stop. Almost losing her balance, she stood up, her nightgown billowing at her bare feet as Link quickly guided her to her wardrobe.
Winter set, now.
Finally listening to his rather authoritative instructions, Zelda moved, opening the wardrobe and grabbing the white and gold winter coat she had. Throwing it over herself, quickly trying to find the sleeve holes to put her arms through, she tried again to piece together what was happening. As she continued getting dressed, Link hurried back to the door.
Link, what is going on?
You'll see, just get your boots on.
Suddenly, he pressed his ear to the wood of the doors.
My boots, but... hold on. Socks. Socks.
Zelda tried looking around for the 2 articles of clothing she needed to cover her bare feet, yet Link again called out to her.
Go without them if you must. Time is running out.
Time? Time for what? Oh dear. Okay.
Grabbing her boots, she reluctantly but forcefully slipped her feet into them before rushing over to her appointed knight.
Okay, what now?
Now, I ask if you trust me.
Zelda blinked.
Do I what?
Do you trust me?
What? Yes, of course I trust you, but... Why?
Link gave a simple, small smile before cutting her off.
Then just follow me and don't stop.
Before Zelda could ask for clarification on what this meant, Link grabbed her hand again before opening the doors to her bedroom. He began darting through the halls, practically dragging the princess behind him.
Link, what's going on? Where are the guards?
Don't worry about it. Just keep those feet moving.
It was only now that Zelda noticed the dark cloak around his shoulders, billowing as they ran.
Are we going somewhere? Are we leaving?
I apologize, but I need you to stop talking or you'll get us caught.
Before she could ask anything else, he brought them to a quick stop, which almost made Zelda trip, and Link threw out an arm to stop her from tumbling. Confused, she opened her mouth to ask why they stopped, but a woman's echoing scream quickly answered her unasked question. In a blur, she watched as a maid passed them by, hysterically yelling and running so fast that she didn't realize whom she'd passed. Watching as the maid dashed away, the princess couldn't help but look down the hall she had come from to see 2 guards, the one she'd recognized as her quarters guards, chasing what appeared to be a jumping amphibian down another corridor.
A frog? What's a frog doing in... Did you bring a frog in here?
To be fair, I got the idea from you.
Before Zelda could ask anything else, he dashed away again, with Zelda being yanked behind him once more. They whizzed and sprinted around what felt like every corner and hallway of the castle. To Zelda, it was incredible they hadn't run into any other guards. The moment the thought crossed her mind, she realized why their route was so sporadic. Link knew the guards' patrol patterns, and just in case, his eyes were focused on every corner and hallway they passed, as if checking to make sure the coast was clear as they ran. She found herself impressed, immersed in each action her knight had taken to get them so far. It was an incredible feat to process so much in mere seconds. Unfortunately, there was one person that happened to get in their way. Before Link and Zelda could pass the next hall, a woman stepped out, holding a stack of papers in one hand and a singular piece of paper in the other, that she seemed to be reading. Hearing the clopping of boots, she turned her attention down the hallway she had walked in front of, noticing the knight and princess barreling toward her. The two screeched to a stop only moments before they trampled over her. Zelda's heart practically sank when she saw Impa's eyes staring into her own. The Sheikah, however, looked shocked. She looked between Link and Zelda, trying to piece together what was going on. She looked at the sweat running down Zelda's brow, heard her heavy breathing from running, saw their hands clasped together, and finally at Link, who seemed physically unaffected by their sprint, simply giving her a deadpan stare. After a moment of silence, Zelda found herself being yanked again. It took a second for her to realize Link had continued their charge, opting to simply run around Impa without giving a single word of explanation. She managed to look back just in time to see Impa gawking as she watched them turn down another hall.
Are you sure that was okay? That didn't seem like it was part of the plan.
She didn't receive an answer in return. Accepting her fate, she continued running, following the knight gripping her hand, passing the blur of blues and silvers that lined the castle halls before finally they found themselves outside the castle walls, having barreled through one of its many exits. By this point, Zelda was gasping for air. It didn't matter that the air outside had practically frozen her lungs. With how fast they'd been moving, her body was sure to melt whatever snow landed in her golden tresses. The pair hurried down the winding brick roads, with Zelda praying she didn't slip on the snow that covered them until eventually the stable house came into view. Without warning, she felt her hood cover her head before hearing Link shout,
My horse!
That shout scared the royal stable master half to death in such darkness. The man looked around before seeing Link running toward them.
I'm late for the Gracemas event! Get my horse out!
Not wishing to question not just a knight, but the Hylian champion who was barreling toward him, the stable master quickly disappeared into the stables before tugging out a rather annoyed horse. Before the stable master could ask any questions, Link jumped into the saddle, pulling the hooded princess quickly up onto it. She found it incredible how easily he was able to calm the horse in less than a second before kicking its sides, urging the steed into an immediate gallop. Almost falling off the back of the horse, Zelda reached out and grabbed the back of Link's cloak, pulling herself close before wrapping her arms around his torso, a desperate attempt to stay astride the saddle. The hero and princess continued their ride away from the castle, swiftly passing through gatehouses before the main castle gate came into view. Again, Link called out that he was late, something that the guards, to Zelda's surprise, didn't question. The large iron door started to rumble open, though Zelda noticed Link hadn't slowed down the horse. In fact, the hero only urged the horse to go faster, choosing not to wait for the gates to fully open. The princess closed her eyes, afraid that they would crash into the gates, yet they flew by, with the doors open just wide enough to slip through. Opening her eyes, Zelda looked back at the retreating gatehouse, the doors still opening as if not realizing they had already passed. She couldn't believe all that had happened. It felt like it all had passed in the blink of an eye. She was out of the castle, in her nightgown with a coat thrown over, boots with no socks, and a hood thrown over her tousled hair. She had been touched so aggressively, and yet she found herself having not minded it once the shock wore off, even believing herself to have enjoyed such roughness. To cap it all off, theoretically, no one knew she was outside. It was exhilarating. As they rode down the bridge toward Castletown, the princess tightened her grip around the knight's torso, pushing her cheek into his shoulder blades as the cold wind blew around them, relishing in her rare freedom from it all. They rode until they reached the town, where Link had guided the horse into the back alleys near the large kingdom wall that surrounded the place. Bringing the horse to a stop, Link climbed down from the saddle before holding out a hand to gently help down the princess.
Good boy, Chark.
He took a moment to pet the stallion's sleek coat before turning to the princess.
Are you alright? I'm sure that was intense for you.
just a bit. Not that I'm complaining at all.
To Link's relief, Zelda had a small smile, holding both ends of her winter coat together to retain better warmth.
Link, why are we out here? I'm sure you didn't do all of that just to stand in the back alleys of Castletown.
You're right. I didn't.
He held out his hand to Zelda once more.
Will you come with me?
Do you believe I'd turn you down now after all that's just happened?
Smiling even larger, she lightly took his hand again. With a light smile from her knight, she allowed Link to guide her once more, but this time she wasn't yanked or pulled. This time, his touch was gentle as he guided her through the alleys shrouded in the darkness of the night.
Link, if I may inquire about this clandestine event you created, you planned all of this, didn't you? Tell me, why did the guards open the gates for you so easily? They didn't inspect us or anything.
They knew I'd be going into town tonight. I made sure everyone knew I'd be going, so they knew to expect me. They didn't know I'd be late, though. Honestly, it was a gamble.
A gamble? Meaning, you had no idea whether they'd let us through or not? You mean to tell me we could have been caught?
We still could be caught if I'm being really honest, but I'd say the risk is worth it.
And what would that worth be exactly?
Link looked back at her, giving off that same small but calming smile.
A moment of normalcy.
To her, his words were almost as bright as the lights behind him. Before she could ask for clarity, the two stepped out into the busy main road of Castletown, where Zelda looked around in awe. Lanterns had been lit, illuminating the street with their golden glow. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the dark clouds above, sparkling in the golden light as they fell on the heads of the crowds that gathered. Though still packed, those who were out and about weren't shoving for space, nor were they rushing, needing to be places at certain times. No, this evening was a holiday, one of joy and peace. Those who were out were all with their families, little kids running around and playing while the adults enjoyed the Graysmith stalls filled with sweets and drinks. All had smiles on their faces. Everyone had eyes on their own joyful families and friends. No one had eyes on the princess that, unbeknownst to them, stood in their presence. No one except her knight.
I figured my gift to you this Graysmith would be to experience Graysmith itself. To experience that as a normal person, not the princess or goddess everyone expects you to be. A chance for you to be just Zelda.
From under her hood, Zelda looked directly into Link's azure eyes. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The gift she had received was so surreal. It had taken the words from her. All she could do was smile and awkwardly laugh.
Does this mean that it's good? I don't know what that means. I did drag you out here into the cold, risking pretty much everything, so maybe this was a bad idea.
No, Link, not at all. This is wonderful. It's absolutely perfect. I mean, look around. All the lights, the laughter, the decorations. I've never been able to see it on this level before. I never knew how tall everyone was. You and I are quite short, aren't we?
She looked around with a bright smile on her face.
I always watched from so high above, whether from a carriage, a stand, or even from the castle walls, with all eyes on me no matter where I stood. Now, here I stand, unseen to the world around us, not even at eye level. and, best of all, I'm here with you.
She turned back to meet his eyes again.
You're the only person here looking at me. The only person I want to look at me.
With her smile still bright, she raised the hand still holding his and brought it to her cheek.
The person keeping me warm through all the cold that surrounds me. I couldn't ask for anything greater than this.
For a moment, she thought she saw Link's already red cheeks darken further, despite still holding the same stoic face he was known for having.
Would you like to walk around for a bit?
I believe I'd enjoy that.
With a slightly awkward nod, Link lightly tugged her hand, beginning to guide her through the streets of Castletown. It was a strange feeling being led by her appointed knight. For much of their history, she had always been in the lead, always guiding the way as he silently followed, only taking point to defend her. Yet, here was that same person, causing chaos within the castle, dragging her by the hand at full sprint, throwing her onto a horse, and now gently guiding her through the city. Sure, multiple new experiences were happening, like being bumped by a shoulder without apology every time they passed someone, or the vibrations of laughter and loud voices, unconcerned with whom they spoke around. Still, it was Link's touch, his presence, that stood out to her the most. Together, they walked through lamp-lit streets, occasionally sampling the treats on offer at various stands, viewing the special entertainers juggling or telling jokes, and simply strolling together in companionable silence as they enjoyed the beauty of the silver and blue decor surrounding them, all while carefully ensuring Zelda's face remained hidden from others. Due to her fancy coat, stand vendors would repeatedly call out to them, assuming they had a pound of rupees to spend. Though they shied away from this attention, their main concern was reserved for the knight standing guard on the occasional street corner, whom Link had to carefully watch out for and pull Zelda away from the moment it seemed eyes were upon them. This wasn't a problem, for Zelda only giggled as they continuously dodged those who got too close. Link grinned as he watched Zelda's smile grow throughout the experience, apparently reveling in the intrigue and excitement. As the night went on, the crowds began to thin, which Zelda found odd.
The streets are clearing. I've never seen it so empty. Is it so late already?
Actually, I'm sure most have gone to the tree. It's the last event of the evening, watching the tree glow during the final hour of Christmas. It must be coming up soon. Shall we?
He seemed so much more serene somehow. This caught the princess off guard, for she had never seen him like this. Sure, he had grown a bit more casual with her, such as when he had almost taken a nap in the fields before she had given him a frog to taste, but that was different from how he was behaving now. Everything in his mannerisms, his touch, and even his eyes had relaxed. For the first time, she felt as though she were seeing him in his entirety.
Zelda? Is something wrong?
Huh? Yes.
She couldn't help but notice his grip on her hand slightly tightened, even if just barely.
I mean, no, nothing's wrong. Please, lead the way.
With a small nod, Link began guiding her down the town streets. As they drew near the central square, the crowds became denser. Soon, both Link and Zelda found themselves having to squeeze past the people, something Link clearly felt bad for putting the princess through. However, his insistence on pushing forward meant what came after was worth the hassle. Eventually, they found themselves at the front of the crowd, where Zelda and Link now stood directly before the large tree they had seen erected the first time they had come through Castletown 11 days ago. This time, however, the tree covering the fountain was not surrounded by ladders and men. Now, it was covered in sparkling ornaments and banners in the same deep navy and shimmering silver the rest of the town had been covered in, along with more recent additions of candy and toys that the children were insisting be added. At the very top was a goddess statue, overlooking the crowd that encircled her from below. Though it had no lights of its own, the tree still appeared to be glowing, possibly reflecting the light of the town with all the silver draping it.
It's beautiful.
Her breathy whisper was almost missed by Link, thanks to the murmur of the crowd around them. He looked down to find her mesmerized by the tree, its sparkling decor reflecting in her emerald eyes.
Is it a different experience to see it from down here?
Zelda nodded slowly, entranced by the tree's beauty.
So much so. Look at all the candies the children placed on it. The care people took in setting it up. The love it holds. It truly is wonderful. Look! People are still adding things to it.
It's their way of giving thanks to the goddess. At least it's supposed to be. Really, for most people, it's just fun to say they put something on the tree. It leaves a good memory.
A good memory. If I'd have known, I would have saved one of the treats from the stalls. Not that this isn't an amazing memory as it is.
She stopped the moment she felt Link lean over. Leaning over herself, she found Link talking to a small child.
Do you mind if I borrow one of these?
Upon closer inspection, Zelda noticed the child was a little girl, holding what looked to be long white and blue hard candies, with a large curve at the top.
Link, stop it. We don't have to.
Her protest was stopped by a sudden gentle squeeze of her hand and his glance at her. When it seemed as though Zelda wouldn't interrupt again, he turned back to the child.
If you do, I'll tell you a secret.
A secret? Is it a good secret?
The best kind. You have my word.
With a smile, he held out a pinky. The little girl looked between his pinky and his eyes before reaching out and wrapping her own little pinky around his.
There. Then, may I?
With a nod, the little girl handed him a candy.
Thank you. I owe you a secret now. Remember, you have to keep it to yourself. You promised, right?
When the girl nodded, he gestured toward Zelda.
You just helped the Princess of Hyrule.
The little girl's eyes widened as she looked up at Zelda before a smile appeared on her face. It looked as though she were about to open her mouth to say something, but Link quickly brought a finger to his lips.
Shh. Remember, you promised.
Covering her mouth with the hand not filled with candies, the little girl nodded before dashing away, as if trying not to scream in joy over having met the princess. Chuckling, Link straightened himself up before holding the candy out to Zelda.
I can't believe you took candy from a child.
It wasn't even trade. To her, far more than even. She just met the Princess of Hyrule.
Nothing much to be excited about.
I think you'd be surprised by how many people would be excited to meet you. You saw her smile, didn't you?
She wanted to disprove him, but she didn't have an argument. The child had been excited to see her. That was clear.
You're surprisingly good with children. Have you ever been told?
Changing the subject, huh? Well, Zelda.
Huh?
The candy?
Link gestured toward one of the lower branches of the tree, causing Zelda's eyes to widen. She looked between Link and the holiday tree before stepping forward, only pausing to look back at him. Confused about why she stopped, Link raised an eyebrow, then felt Zelda tug at the hand she still firmly grasped. She held the candy out to him.
Together, since there's only one. A good memory for both of us.
After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward, taking part of the candy into his free hand, his fingers partly covering Zelda's. As he stepped forward, he looked at her, meeting her eyes, where they stayed locked for a few moments before they both reached up and placed the candy on the tree together. When the candy was in place, they stepped back, inspecting their simple but meaningful work.
A good memory for both of us.
Link, this is...
Zelda began, still looking at the candy and the tree standing before them.
This is one of the best holiday nights I've had since my mother, and there is no greater gift I could have received.
She tore her gaze away from the tree to meet Link's eyes again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you think you did all of this, and yet I have nothing to give you in return?
I don't need anything from...
Link's words were soon interrupted by the rumbling of the crowd. Both he and Zelda looked around to find that the crowd had started humming a familiar tune for the holiday. It was a sign that the crowd was about to start singing.
I know this hymn. They sing this every year during the last few minutes of Gracemas. I always hear it from my room.
Eventually, she began to hum along as well, matching the notes the villagers were humming. Soon, humming gave way to singing, as the residents of Castletown became a choir. Though the entire town was singing, Link only listened to Zelda's harmonious voice. In his mind, they were the only two standing in the square in front of the tree as Zelda sang along, this time one with the crowd instead of watching from afar. Her soothing notes traveled through his ears, echoing lightly through his mind as each word filled his soul. Her voice was as beautiful as her. Link hadn't even noticed when the crowd and Zelda's singing had stopped. Her song continued to echo through his mind as he stared at her, still holding her small hand in his. The only thing that could snap him out of his trance was her own voice.
Link? Link? Are you alright?
Yeah, I'm alright. Sorry, I guess I think I just received my gift for this year is all.
Your gift? From me? What did I... Oh.
The blush on his cheeks, already red from the cold, intensified. She wanted to avert her eyes out of shyness, and yet Link's azure gaze had entranced her. The two stood in front of the tree, the light illuminating their skin as their eyes reflected each other. The knight and the princess, though neither title was what the other saw. No, what they saw were each other. Link and Zelda. The only thing that could break their locked gazes. The only thing that made them realize just how close their faces had gotten to each other, how close their lips had gotten to each other, was the ringing of the town bell. The moment the first loud chime sounded, the two jumped, looking around as the townspeople cheered around them. It was a deep, sonorous chime, repeating every few seconds, its vibrations reverberating throughout the land.
Midnight. Gracemas is over.
Yeah, it is.
Slowly, he took a step back from her. They looked at each other, both seeming as though they wanted to say something, but neither spoke. Soon, they noticed the townsfolk beginning to turn away from the tree, the murmurs of goodbyes and yawns echoing through the streets.
I guess it's time to head back.
Yeah, we should get a move on before it becomes easy for a guard to spot you.
Do you think the guards will question us at the gate?
If they do, I'll do the talking. Come on. We should probably get going.
Though clearly saddened, Zelda nodded in agreement. Together, the two vanished into the crowds, off to retrieve the stallion they had left in the alleyways. Surprisingly, the two didn't have any issues coming back into the castle. The guards opened the gates for the hero without any question. The horse was put away, and the halls were empty as the hero guided them around the knight's patrol routes. Eventually, they reached the hallway leading to Zelda's quarters, where the two guards had returned to their post. They looked shaken to see the princess and her appointed knight approaching the room's double doors, a sure sign that they hadn't even realized the princess had been away.
Princess? When did you...
The princess decided to try a few late-night prayers, an attempt at unlocking her powers without all eyes on her in the last moments of Gracemas. You would have known had you both been at your post.
Well, Sir Link, there was an incident with a frog. We heard a yell, and we thought there might be a danger, one that could find the princess.
Yet Link simply raised a hand.
Mistakes happen. We'll keep what happened today between us, but do not let it happen again. Understood?
Understood.
With a wave from Link, the guard stepped aside, allowing the princess and Link into her room. When the door closed behind them, they stepped toward the armchair to ensure they wouldn't be overheard.
Are you certain they won't say anything about you entering my chamber this late?
I doubt it. They now know I have something over their heads.
Something you caused.
Taking a deep breath, she calmed herself, allowing the two of them to listen to the crackling of the fireplace in silence. After a few moments, Link cleared his throat.
Well, I'd best be heading off before the two guards gain heavier leverage than I do.
Right. That would be for the best.
Though her voice was filled with disappointment, both knew he couldn't stay. With a nod, Link placed a hand on his chest and gave a light bow.
Good night, Zelda. Happy Gracemas.
The use of her name brought a small smile to Zelda's face.
Good night, Link, and a happy Gracemas to you as well.
Looking up from his bow, he returned her small smile before heading to the door. Placing a hand on the door handle, he looked back at her one last time, taking in the sight of her beauty as she waved to him in farewell before opening the door and disappearing out of the room. Now alone, Zelda removed the winter coat and hood, revealing the night dress underneath. After hanging it back up in her wardrobe, she sat on the bed and pulled her bare feet from the winter boots she had been wearing, only just now realizing how uncomfortable they had been, yet this only made her giggle. Exhausted, she lay in her bed, looking up at the silk canopy, thinking back to the night she had experienced. Though she loved every moment, her thoughts always found themselves back to her and Link's closest moment, where their eyes were locked and their faces were close. The memory stayed in her mind long after her eyes had closed, turning from an unfinished memory into a festive dream. Hours had passed since the bell of Castletown had rung, and from the castle library, the king emerged from his private study, exhausted from the night he had spent reading through the multiple books he had requested. Still, there was nothing on the sealing powers, nothing that would help his daughter succeed. Tired, he wiped the dryness from his eyes, ready to head to his own private quarters, only to be stopped by one of the royal guards standing at the entrance of his study.
Sire! I apologize for bothering you so early in the morning.
The royal guardsman bowed, only for Rome to wave it off.
What is it you must report? I assume you wouldn't be doing so if it weren't important.
Yes, Your Majesty. It's been brought to the Royal Guard's attention that there were a few reports from Castletown guards that the princess was spotted amongst the townsfolk. There were also a few reports of a commotion near the princess's room, yet the two standing guards refused to answer any questions. There was word that Lady Impa may have seen something, yet she also refused to make any comments.
Are you saying you believe my daughter snuck out to see the town's festivities?
The royal guardsman nodded.
Were there any reports of her being with someone?
Yes. They say someone who looked like the Hylian champion was...
Before the royal guardsman could properly explain, the king raised a hand in silence.
Leave them be. Allow the reports to become rumors and nothing more.
But, Your Majesty...
One look from the king silenced him. Standing straight, the guard nodded.
As you wish. Have a good morning, Your Majesty.
And you as well.
With that, Rome headed off down the library hall. As he walked down his castle halls, he originally made to head to his room, yet his tired feet ended up carrying him elsewhere. Eventually, he found himself standing in front of an old staircase, one he knew led deeper into the castle undercroft, levels far below that of even the dungeons, an area that had been ruled off-limits to all, even royals, for as long as anyone could remember. Unable to contain himself, he continued, disappearing into the darkness. With each descending step, the stone turned from brilliant white to an old tan and soon even darker. Flame lanterns were replaced by strange, luminescent, plant-like bulbs and enormous statues representing tall creatures of ancient origin, with ears much bigger than that of any Hylian, standing sentinel in their obscurity. Eventually, he came to a stop deep within the castle's depths, where he stood in a large, destroyed room, studying a mural on the wall before him.
The sages showed me this mural 10 years ago. Tell me, when will you reappear, Calamity Ganon?
With tired eyes, he regarded the mural. Most of its depictions had been covered by stone that had fallen from above, all except one, portraying a vast army of bokoblins, moblins, and other horned creatures, overtaking what appeared to be another army closely resembling Hylian forces. The king's eyes narrowed, staring at the mural he had been shown long ago, wishing all the other murals were uncovered. Yet, at the time he had been shown, he had also been told never to bring another soul down here. He alone could be shown proof that the evil upon them was real, possibly far more dangerous than they could ever imagine, and that Hyrule Castle was guarding something, containing something. The king could only hope that what these murals depicted was, in fact, the Calamity Ganon, and not another force he needed to worry about. He bowed his head and murmured a soft, practiced prayer to Hylia, asking for her blessing and guidance to be bestowed on his daughter Zelda. As he blinked his eyes open and stared at the mural, he ran a hand through his beard. He didn't know what fearsome battles lay before them, but he could already feel the ache and exhaustion in his bones. Before returning up the stairs to the castle, he said one final prayer, asking that this wouldn't be the final Gracemas of Hyrule.